Hello, and welcome to the American Center and to our workshop series on methodology. Thank you for coming and joining us, and I hope today we will add more to your strategies and your resources for teaching English. Today, our topic is layered reading. I want to start by briefly introducing myself. For those of you that are new to our workshop series, my name is Heidi Healy. I am from Utah in the Western United States, and I have been teaching English both in the US as well as internationally for about 10 years now. I'm currently a virtual English language fellow, and part of my responsibilities are to provide this workshop series for the amazing teachers in Mongolia. So let's go ahead and get started. Today I have 3 objectives. That 1, you'll be able to list the 3 steps in planning layered reading. 2, list 2 activities for each of these steps. And finally, think about some applications for your class. How can you apply what we're talking about today into your own teaching? Here's our overview. We're going to start with a brief introduction to the topic. Then I'm going to walk you through a reading lesson using the strategy SQ3R. And then we'll discuss some other strategies you can use for teaching reading in your classroom. Today, I want to start with a story and an analogy. This is my friend, John. John and I both worked in China. I was in the city of Chongqing, up in the northeast part of China, and John worked at a university in Beijing. One weekend, John came up to visit me in my city and do a workshop for teachers there. And while he was there, we decided to go climbing. My friend John is a climber. He has been climbing all over the world. He climbs outside and he climbs in gyms. He's been doing it for many years and he's very good at it. I am not an expert climber. I'm a novice climber. I've been climbing at climbing gyms before, but it's not something I do a lot, and it's not something I'm very good at. John and I found a climbing wall located at my university, and we went to climb. We got there and got our gear and started looking at this wall. So here's me on the wall. So I'm looking up at the wall and thinking, whew, that is a high wall. And this was fine. I'd been climbing before. I knew to trust my ropes. I knew that I was going to be safe. And I thought, okay, I can, that's tall, but I can make it. So I got on the wall and I just started looking at any place I could put my hands and feet. And most of the way up the wall, this is exactly what I looked at. My hands were at the top, my feet were at the bottom, and very slowly, grabbing onto whatever I could reach, I made my way to the top of the wall. I mainly just grabbed onto anything I could reach. I didn't have any plan. I didn't have any strategy. I just grabbed onto the next closest hold. I made it to the top. I slid down my rope and I just breathed a sigh of relief. I had climbed the wall. Then I watched my friend John climb the wall. Now, John started completely different than me. He looked at the wall and I could tell that he was thinking, and he walked all along the wall and looked at the different routes, the different ways up the wall. And he decided to climb this particular route using only the purple handholds. This is quite common for expert climbers. I could tell that he was thinking about where he was going to put his hands and his feet before he ever got on the wall. Then he got on the wall, and pretty soon he was moving confidently up the wall. I could also tell as he was moving up the wall, he was continuing to think about where to put his hands and where to put his feet in order to reach his goal, and how was the best way to get up his route. John was also more prepared. He had better shoes, specific shoes for climbing. He also had a bag of chalk on his hip to put on his hands to increase his ability to hold on to the wall. John quickly made it up the wall, and then he came back down. When he came down the wall, he started thinking about how he had gotten up the wall, things he might have done differently, and he also started stretching out his arms and his legs. John and I had very different techniques for climbing up this wall. We both climbed, but John was much more successful. He was much more able to have a good experience. And this analogy applies to our students with reading. When our students are first learning to read, they approach a reading passage much like I approached the wall. It seems to be this very big challenge, and usually they're just holding on to whatever they can. As our students learn more strategies and techniques, they become more expert at reading. And this helps them to be able to be more successful and approach reading in a more strategic way. Our job as teachers is to help our students become experts at reading. And we do this by giving them the strategies and tools that they need in order to become expert readers. One way we do this is through a technique called layered reading. This involves reading a text multiple times using multiple strategies to increase comprehension. And really, this is what good readers do. We read things multiple times. We use different strategies so that we can really understand what we're reading. This includes thinking about before, during, and after strategies. To give you an example of what a lesson might look like, I now want to walk you through a reading lesson using the strategy SQ3R. SQ3R stands for survey, question, read, recite, and review. We'll go through each of these steps together. First, everyone needs a reading passage. You should have the passage, A History of Halloween. First, we're going to start by surveying. This simply means to preview. Previewing might involve looking at pictures, reading the title, skimming and scanning through the reading for vocabulary words or other information, just to get a sense of the reading. So I would like you to take 2 minutes and quickly preview the article. Remember, this is a survey. You shouldn't be reading every word at this point. Just briefly read the title and skim over the passage to get an idea of what it is about. You have 2 minutes. Now that you've completed this survey, we move on to our next step, and that is question. I would like you to write 2 to 3 questions you have about this passage. Don't worry about asking questions about specific details. Ask more general questions. For example, you might ask, where did Halloween start? Or, when did Halloween start? These might be some questions you might have about this passage. Take about 2 minutes to write 2 to 3 general questions about the passage. Excellent. Now we're going to read. In order to make this easier, I'm going to play the reading for you from the website ReadWorks. and I would like you to follow along with the reading. As we are reading, think about your 2 to 3 questions. And if you find the answer to your question in the reading, mark it with a star or some other kind of notation on your paper. So let's read our article now, A History of Halloween.
History of Halloween by Readworks. Michaela gently placed her black witch's hat on top of her black curls as she looked at herself in the mirror. Her mom had painted her skin green and outlined her eyes in purple paint. She wore tall black boots underneath a long purple dress. It was October 31st, and she was ready for trick-or-treating on Halloween night. "Michaela!" her mom called out from downstairs. Michaela's 2 friends, Colden and Porter, had arrived. Colden stood in the doorway, his costume blowing in the wind. A white sheet hung over his head, and his eyes peered out from 2 cut-out holes. Porter decided to dress like his favorite superhero, Batman. A black mask covered his face and a long cape trailed behind him. They carried plastic pumpkin bowls to carry candy later in the evening. The 2 boys greeted Michaela with equal levels of excitement. "Hi, Michaela," Colden said. "You ready to go trick-or-treating?" Porter asked. She nodded her head and ran to grab her coat. "Let's go, everyone," her mom called out. And they all marched out the front door. All around them, children and parents walked from door to door in colorful costumes. Carved jack-o'-lanterns sat in front of houses, candles shimmering inside the orange pumpkins. A breeze blew past Michaela and her friends, making her shiver. The weather had just started to get colder. Michaela remembered her class earlier that day when her teacher talked about the origins of Halloween. Mrs. Narula told Michaela and her classmates that the holiday started with an ancient festival called Samhain, 2,000 years ago in Ireland. The word Samhain means summer's end in Gaelic, a language spoken in Ireland and Scotland. Mrs. Narula looked at different documents from the American Folk Life Center to find out about Halloween's history. She found that the festival celebrated the end of summer and the beginning of winter, a time to gather crops to prepare for the colder months. The Celtic people who celebrated this festival also believed it was the time when all the souls who had died that year traveled to the next world. To keep the dead spirits away, people lit bonfires. For ceremonies, some dressed in animal furs to disguise themselves so that the dead spirits would not be able to recognize them. Mrs. Narula said this is one reason why we might still dress up in costumes today. Later, the festival of Samhain was replaced with All Souls' Day, a Christian holiday that honored the dead. People celebrated with bonfires and parades. They also dressed up in costumes as saints, angels, and devils. Porter reached up and pressed the doorbell at the house across the street. Ding dong! A big green Frankenstein pulled open the door, holding a big bowl of wrapped treats. Michaela and her friends gasped and then laughed when they realized it was just Mr. Clock dressed up. "Trick or treat," the 3 sang with big smiles. As Mr. Clock sprinkled candy into their baskets, Michaela thought of Mrs. Narula again. In the 1800s, many people from Ireland and Scotland came to the United States to start a new life. The teacher told her students earlier that day. Even though their ancestors had their own trick-or-treating traditions, they started their own in their new country. Mrs. Narula had read an article by Benjamin Radford, a man who researches science and history. He wrote that teenagers in those communities started to play pranks during Halloween celebrations. Adults tried to stop the pranks by giving children candy instead. And the tradition still remains today, with children all over the world dressing up for candy.
Okay, so we've now read the passage. Our next step is recite. In this case, recite means we're going to answer those questions that we asked back before we read. So I would now like you to take a couple of minutes, make a group of 3 or 4 teachers, and answer your questions. So read your question to your group and then share the answer from the passage. Great. So now, some of you may have had questions that weren't answered as part of the reading, and that's okay. We can tell that's fine. Maybe this is a question you can investigate on your own after our workshop today. Our final step in our reading strategy is to review. In this case, we're going to create a summary about the reading. So I would like you to again look back at the reading. Don't read everything, but feel free to skim or scan over it. Take a few minutes and write a summary, one short paragraph about what this reading is about. I'll give you a few minutes to create a summary and then share it with your group. Great. So this SQ3R strategy is a way of helping students do things before, during, and while they read. Before, we have students survey a text and ask a few questions. During reading, they're reading and paying attention to answer those questions they asked. And finally, after reading, they're answering the questions and then creating a summary of the reading by looking back at the text. So in each of these steps, the students are referencing the text and they're answering questions and doing things so that their attention is focused on the text. And this helps to increase their comprehension. SQ3R is not the only strategy we can use to develop this idea of layered reading, of using before, during, and after strategies to increase comprehension. So now I'd like to take some time and go through some other things, other activities that you can use in your classroom to build these types of reading lessons. First, let's talk about some things you can do before you read. Before is all about preparing, getting ready to read. Some of the things we might do are to set a purpose, to activate schema, preview, and predict. Let's talk briefly about each of these. So first, we want to make sure that we understand why we are reading. This is important because we read differently depending on our purpose. So we might teach our students about why they are reading. Are they reading for enjoyment, just to have fun? Are they reading to gain background knowledge or learn information in order to write something or in order to do a presentation in class? Or are they reading for testing? Each of these are going to require some different strategies, and we want our students to be aware of that. Next, often before we read, we need to help students activate or build schema. Schema is our background knowledge, what we already know about a topic. This is important because it helps us to understand. If we're reading about something we don't know anything about, it makes it more difficult. And so by helping students either activate or build background knowledge, we increase their understanding. Some ways we might do this include watching a video, doing a think, pair, share activity, previewing, or going over vocabulary from the passage. So in doing a preview, one strategy that we can use is the Thieves Strategy. So thieves, it's the first letter of each word or phrase here spells the word thieves with 2 V's. This strategy is especially helpful for higher level readings, such as you would find in high school or university. Given a certain text, such as a chapter in a textbook, students look at the title, headings, the introduction, every first sentence, vocabulary, visuals, such as pictures and graphs, every question, such as those that might be asked at the beginning or the end of the chapter, and finally, the last paragraph or summary. This helps students to get a good idea of what they are reading. For less academic readings, such as those you might find in high school or middle school or even primary school, you might reduce these steps. Maybe you only look at the title, the first sentence, and the last sentence, and any visuals. You might also include vocabulary. For predicting, you might start by previewing. So look at the title, any headings, and any pictures, and then asking students to predict what will the reading be about based on that information. Or you might have students predict what words might be in the reading. This can help students with previewing vocabulary. Let's try this one together. So if I were to tell you we're going to read a passage about Halloween, what words might be in the passage? You can work on your own or with a partner. Take about 2 minutes and brainstorm what are some of the words you might read in a passage about Halloween. Excellent. Thank you for sharing your words. These are some of the words I came up with: October, pumpkin, trick or treat, costume, witch, ghost, vampire, superhero, jack-o'-lantern, candy, scary, or scared. Maybe you had some of these same terms and phrases in your list. Now I'd like you to take a minute and discuss with your group. What are some things you do with your students before you read? Thank you for sharing your ideas. Next, we read, but we want to make sure that students have a task to help them focus while they are reading. Many times we have students answer comprehension questions. So we may read the comprehension questions before they read the passage in order to help them look for the specific answers to the questions. That's a great strategy for during reading. because it helps students have a purpose or a focus to their reading. Let's talk about some other things we could have students do while they read. 4 things I've done with my students are to have them check comprehension, use margin notes, use telegram or highlighting, and complete graphic organizers. First, check comprehension. This is really important for students, that we teach them that it's important for them to be self-checking if they are understanding. So I teach my students that after every paragraph or every section, they need to ask themselves the question, do I understand? If the answer is yes, perfect, keep reading. If the answer is no, then they need to do something to fix that problem. So I want to teach them some fix-it strategies. Maybe there's a specific word they don't understand that's causing the problem. So they need to look this word up in a dictionary or translate it. Maybe they don't understand because they're lacking background knowledge. Maybe the reading is about an American holiday or an American tradition, and they don't quite understand because they don't know about it. So they need to find a way to build schema, such as finding a video to watch on the topic. Maybe there's another problem. Maybe the student is very tired or very hungry, and they need to eat a snack or take a short rest before doing a more challenging reading task. Again, it's important that students are learning to self-monitor their own comprehension and fix things when they don't understand something. Another strategy I like to use with my students is using margin notes. Sometimes people also call this annotating. When I have my students make margin notes, I have them write in the margins of their reading. If they need to not write in the book, I might have them write on a piece of paper, or I might have them write on sticky notes and put the notes in the reading. I tell students that their margin notes are for them to help them understand. But some common things we write about are summaries or keywords, so writing those in the margins, writing questions if there's places that I don't understand, writing connections that I have, such as personal experiences that help me better understand the reading, or maybe the reading reminds me of a movie I have seen or another thing I have read. And finally, I might use a question mark to mark things where I don't understand. Or maybe I use a star to mark something I think is important. So I would like you to try this now. Pull out the reading, A History of Halloween. On the first page, there are 4 paragraphs. I would like you to read these 4 paragraphs and make some margin notes. And then share your notes with a small group of 3 to 4 teachers. Excellent. What did your margin notes look like? These are my margin notes. So after the first paragraph, I wrote the word witch because that was Michaela's costume for Halloween. And then I made a personal connection. I wrote, I was a witch for Halloween once. So this is making me remember a personal experience, which helps me to better understand the reading. After the 3rd paragraph, I wrote the word ghost because that was Colden's Halloween costume. A white sheet hung over his head and his eyes peered out from 2 cutout holes. I didn't write a connection here, but I remember my mom had a really little ghost costume that we would wear when we were little kids, 3 or 4 years old. Very similar to this. It was just a white sheet. Ours had a hood, so our faces showed. Finally, my last paragraph, I wrote the word Batman, because this was Porter's costume. And when I think about Batman, I remember watching Batman TV shows when I was a kid with my brothers. So I wrote down that personal connection. Maybe you had some different margin notes. Maybe there were places where you had questions, or maybe you had other connections. Maybe you connected to a TV show or a movie, and that's great. This is really personal, but it helps us to better understand the reading. Telegram is similar to margin notes, and Telegram is helpful, especially when reading bigger, longer, more academic texts. I taught this a lot to my university students to help them read textbooks or more academic articles. The idea is for each paragraph, they write 1 to 2 words that summarize that paragraph. This helps them have to think about, did I understand? What is the most important word or phrase for this paragraph? As an alternative, students could use a highlighter and highlight 1 key word, phrase, or sentence for each paragraph. Again, this makes them really think about what is most important, which increases their comprehension. Finally, I wanted to briefly mention graphic organizers. There are many different types of graphic organizers, and different graphic organizers are useful for different kinds of writing. For example, a Venn diagram can be helpful for comparison and contrast. A T-chart can also be helpful for comparison and contrast, or writing notes on 2 separate ideas. A timeline can be helpful for process paragraphs, as can a flow chart. A timeline can also be helpful when writing about like a biography, something about a person, or a story, a narrative of what happened over time. Story maps are also great for looking at writing a narrative story. Clusters or word webs can help with definition paragraphs or opinion paragraphs. The 5 W's are great for informative paragraphs, giving information about things. And cause and effect and problem solution graphic organizers help us organize the information for those kinds of reading or writing. I've included at the end of this presentation a resource for more information about graphic organizers. So now I'd like you to again take a few minutes and discuss with 4 to 5 of your fellow participants, what are some things you have your students do while they read? Finally, let's discuss what you do after you read. Many times after we read, we just have students answer a list of comprehension questions in the book. And this can be valuable, but we can also expand and extend this to help students understand, apply what they're reading about. Some things we might do after include having students draw, speak or write, do a 3-2-1 summary, or do some kind of an expansion activity to help them expand and make their learning more extensive. For example, I might have students draw something. Maybe I have them draw the most important part or the most interesting part of a story we read. Or maybe I have them draw a series of pictures with or without words to show information from a text or to show the story that we read about. This is an example of a collage or a drawing that was done about the topic of matter. Another thing we can do is have students speak or write. Besides answering comprehension questions, we could have them share a summary or write a summary. Or we could even have them do comprehension questions, do open-ended comprehension questions, so not just multiple choice ones. Or instead of doing the questions in their workbook or textbook, have them talk about the answers with a partner or a small group. A 3-2-1 summary is another great way to have students think about a reading afterwards. A 3-2-1 summary is very flexible. It might look something like this. Have students tell 3 things they learned, 2 questions they have, and 1 thing they found interesting. But this is not set. We can change what the 3, 2, and 1 are depending on the needs of our learners and what we're focusing on. For example, if I was teaching my students about making connections, I might do a 3-2-1 summary that looks like this. What are 3 new words you learned from the passage? 2 connections you made, maybe 1 personal connection and 1 world connection, text to text or text to movie. And then maybe what is 1 question you still have about the reading? This 3-2-1 summary can be very flexible. You can basically do almost anything with it. And again, asking students 3 somethings, 2 somethings, and 1 something. Finally, we can expand upon what students have read about, have them apply what they read about to their own lives, or even take the reading and create a similar writing activity from it. For example, I might have students tell or write about what they would dress up as for Halloween. Maybe I have them even draw a picture of their costume and then share it either with a group or as a short presentation in class. Or I could have students tell or write about a fall holiday in Mongolia. What's a fall holiday in their own culture? And try to follow the example of the reading passage. So let's do this first one now. Take a minute and find make a group again of 4 to 5 teachers and quickly tell if you came to the United States for Halloween and dressed up as a character, who or what would you dress up as? Great, thanks for sharing with your groups. Americans get really creative about our Halloween costumes. We dress up as scary things like ghosts and witches. We dress up as our favorite characters from books and movies. We make pop culture references. And we even dress up as basic things. We dress up as, sometimes you'll have couples, the boyfriend and girlfriend, or other couples that will dress up as bacon and eggs or salt and pepper or other things that go together. We get really creative with our Halloween costumes. So finally, take a few minutes and now discuss what are some things you do with your students after you read. Excellent. Thank you for sharing with one another. So in this workshop, we've talked about layered reading. This idea of reading a text multiple times using multiple strategies to increase comprehension. So each time, each of these activities should include having students reference the text. Before they read, they reference the text. They look at the pictures. They look at the title. They maybe read the first paragraph. During the reading, they're reading everything very thoroughly. And finally, after they read, we again want to set a task where they need to re-reference the reading, perhaps skim through the reading to find a specific answer, or perhaps look back at vocabulary words, or look back to be able to complete some other kind of task. But the idea is that students have the opportunity to access a text multiple times in multiple ways, and this increases their understanding. Again, I'd just like to briefly mention our Facebook page, and the AC Methodology Workshop Series. I would love to hear from you here. Feel free to ask me questions or share examples of activities or things that you do. If you have questions, please feel free to post them in the group. I am getting on the group regularly and will be happy to respond to your questions. Here are my resources for this workshop. You can get on isaacsonliteracy.com to learn about some other strategies for learning to read, as well as this article on the Reading Rockets website that includes some information about graphic organizers. I'd just like to end by thank you again for being here today, for sharing with your fellow teachers, and for building our knowledge together about teaching reading. I hope that as you leave today, you will think about 1 or 2 ideas or activities that you can implement in your classroom. And again, thank you for attending and for being amazing English teachers. Have a great evening.